My name is Marion Leland, and I turned 65 last winter. People used to call me steady, someone who showed up early, paid her bills, remembered birthdays. I built my life on the quiet things that last, or so I thought. That morning, I stood on the far side of Abercorn Street in Savannah, the air heavy with river mist and magnolia across the road. A sleek black Mercedes stopped in front of the pale blue house I'd once called mine. I knew that car. My son Ethan had always wanted one like it, and now he had it along with the life that came with it. He stepped out first, crisp in a navy jacket, his tie loosened as if the world owed him comfort. Then came Lydia, graceful in a white sundress, carrying a suitcase that probably cost more than my old Buick. They laughed about something I couldn't hear. When Ethan reached the porch, he pulled out his key ring, the same brass key I'd given him when he moved in. He slid it into the lock. Nothing. He tried again, twisting harder. The metal scraped uselessly. Lydia frowned. Glancing toward the neighbor's window, Ethan bent down, muttering, shaking the doorknob. That was when a man in a gray blazer approached from the sidewalk. A leather folder tucked under his arm. I recognized him instantly, the real estate agent I'd signed papers with the day before. "Mr. Leland," he said. "You won't be able to get in. The property transferred yesterday at noon." Ethan froze, hand still on the handle. Lydia's expression hardened. Confusion mixing with something colder. From where I stood, half hidden behind the oak tree, I could see my son's mouth form my name. He looked up and down the street, bewildered, as if he might find me materialized from the past to explain it all. But I didn't move. The old house no longer belonged to him, or to me. In my purse, the deed transfer and the keys rested side by side, weightless, after so many years of holding everything together. Later that day, I walked down to Rusakis Riverfront Park, the tide high and silver. The wind lifted my hair as I dropped those keys into the water and whispered, "This is how it ends." 2 weeks earlier, Savannah had been dressed in sunlight, the kind that turned the river gold and made the shutters on my little house shine like they'd been freshly painted. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, the kind of morning that asks for no drama, just quiet. I'd opened Facebook out of habit, scrolling past church bake sales and garden photos. Then a familiar name appeared, Ethan Leland, tagged in a photo from someone I didn't know. I tapped it without thinking. The image filled the screen before I could breathe. Ethan stood in a tailored black suit, one hand tucked around Lydia's waist. Her white dress shimmered like sunlight on glass. Behind them stood two elegant people I recognized from a brief, awkward dinner months ago, her parents, the Harrises. Everyone smiled. Everyone except me. The caption read, "Our special day. Family complete." My hand tightened around the mug until the handle snapped clean off. Coffee spilled across the table, bleeding into old grocery lists. The words on the screen blurred, but the photo didn't go away. My son, my only child, had gotten married, without a word, without me. I scrolled through the comments. "So happy for you both. Perfect couple. Beautiful family." Each line pressed down harder, like a shovel covering something already buried. I looked for any sign of me, a mention, a memory, even a small thank you. "Mom." There was nothing. I called him once. No answer. Twice. Straight to voicemail. On the third try, the line connected, but only for a second. His voice was distant. Distracted. "Hey, Mom, can I call you later? It's kind of a busy day," I whispered. I saw the photo. There was silence, a shuffle of footsteps, and then the line went dead. The house felt colder, though the sunlight still poured through the windows. I sat there, staring at the empty mug and the photo glowing from my phone screen. Somewhere in that image, my name had been erased so neatly it looked like it had never been there at all. The night after I saw the wedding photo, I couldn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face beneath that chapel light. Happy, proud, untouched by the years that had carved themselves into me. So I did what I always did when my mind refused to rest. I started to clean. The smell of bleach and lemon filled the kitchen. Sharp and grounding. I wiped the counters until the wood showed through. And somewhere between scrubbing and remembering, the years began to unspool. Ethan was 5 when his father, Calvin, died in the paper mill accident. The company called it equipment failure, but we both knew it was greed and negligence machines left running too long, safety checks ignored. I stood at that funeral with a folded flag and a boy who didn't yet understand what it meant to lose the person who lifted him up to see fireworks. After that, I learned how many hours a body can work before it begins to forget itself. I cleaned offices on Broughton Street from 6 at night until 3 in the morning. Empty rooms with fluorescent lights that buzzed like insects by day. I pieced together quilts from old fabric scraps, selling them at the market down by River Street. Ethan used to fall asleep on the couch beside my sewing table, his small hand gripping one of my half-finished quilts. I told him, "Everything I stitch is for you, baby. One day you'll have choices I never did." And he did. Scholarships came, then a degree, then that first job in Atlanta. When he called to say he wanted to buy a house, I opened the savings account I'd guarded like a secret. Years of tips, bonuses, and late-night sewing had become enough for a down payment. "I'll put it under my name," I told him gently, just for safety. He'd smiled, thinking it was a mother's overprotectiveness. Maybe it was. Maybe it was also the last time my love still felt like something he wanted. By the time dawn broke, my hands smelled of bleach, and the memory of his wedding photo glowed again from my phone screen, proof of everything that love had bought, and everything it couldn't keep. Ethan met Lydia Harris during his last year of graduate school in Atlanta. He called me that night, his voice light in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. "She's brilliant. Mom, runs her own projects already, comes from a great family. You'd really like her," and I did. At first, I liked the sound of him being in love, the way it softened his tone. When they visited that Christmas, Lydia brought a bottle of wine wrapped in gold paper and complimented my roast chicken as if she were reading from a script. She was polite, poised, the kind of woman who never tripped over her own words. I could tell she'd been raised to never raise her voice. It was Ethan who changed first. Calls that used to come every evening turned into quick check-ins between meetings. When I asked how work was going, he'd say, "Busy. Mom, but good. You know how it is." His laughter became practiced, efficient. The next time I saw him, he'd moved into a glass apartment in Midtown, high ceilings and pale furniture that looked untouched. I brought him one of my quilts, a soft patchwork of blues and yellows, and he smiled, but his eyes darted toward Lydia. She ran her hand along the fabric, her manicured nails catching on a loose thread. "It's lovely," she said gently, "though it doesn't quite fit the color palette." The next morning, the quilt had disappeared from the couch. Lydia's family ran an event company, hosting parties for clients I'd only read about in magazines. She invited me to one once a charity gala with crystal chandeliers and food served in tiny porcelain spoons. Everyone was gracious. And yet, I'd never felt so invisible. When I mentioned my old job cleaning offices in Savannah, the man beside me smiled tightly and said, "That's honest work." Then he turned away. On the drive home, Ethan rested his hand on mine. "Don't mind them. Mom," he said, his voice low. "They just come from a different world." I looked out the window at the skyline, glittering and distant, and realized he did, too. When Ethan told me he and Lydia were engaged, his voice carried a polite excitement, the kind reserved for a work promotion. I congratulated him. Of course, how could I not? But something in his tone careful, measured, made me uneasy. "When's the wedding?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, we're still deciding," he said. "Maybe something small. Lydia's parents want to help with the planning." "Small sounds lovely," I replied. "Tell me what I can do." "I'll bake, decorate, anything you need." He laughed lightly. "You don't have to worry about that. Lydia's mom has a planner. After that." Each time I tried to ask for details, his answers drifted like smoke, nothing I could hold on to. "Still choosing a venue. Haven't finalized the date. It's all up in the air." I told myself they were just busy. I even bought a soft blue dress from a boutique downtown, something I could wear to a spring ceremony. It hung on my closet door for weeks, tags still on, waiting for an invitation that never came. The day I finally found out was quiet and ordinary. I was scrolling through Facebook while waiting for my tea to steep. The post appeared like a wound that opened without warning. Ethan and Lydia stood under an oak tree draped in white lights. She wore a simple gown, elegant and soft. He looked taller than I remembered. Beside them were her parents, beaming. The caption beneath the photo read, "Our special day, family complete." There was no mistaking it. No ceremony postponed. No misunderstanding. It had happened without me. My throat tightened as I stared at the screen, searching for some trace of my existence. There was none. I clicked through every picture, each one a confirmation of my absence. I deleted the post from my feed, but it didn't matter. The image was already carved somewhere deeper. The tea kettle whistled, sharp and distant. I turned it off and sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, listening to the hollow sound of the house breathing around me. The blue dress still hung in the corner, untouched, like a promise that had never been made. They came on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced but expected in the quiet way. Guilt eventually arrives. I heard the car door shut and saw them through the window, Ethan carrying a small bag, Lydia adjusting her sunglasses, both smiling like nothing had ever happened. "Mom," Ethan said when I opened the door, his voice too cheerful, too bright. "We're back from Cabo. We brought you something." I stepped aside to let them in. The house smelled of lemon polish and the faint sweetness of the pecan Danish I'd baked that morning. My ritual for years, something warm in case he came by. Lydia placed the bag on the table and began to unpack it a seashell. 2 keychains that read Cabo San Lucas and a folded t-shirt that still had its price tag. "We thought of you," she said softly. Her perfume vanilla and salt air filled the kitchen, sharp enough to sting. "That's very kind," I murmured, pouring sweet tea into 3 glasses. My hands were steady, but my heartbeat wasn't. Ethan glanced around the room, avoiding my eyes. The framed photo of his graduation still sat on the shelf, dusted every week, facing the empty chair where he used to sit for breakfast. He cleared his throat. "It was a small ceremony, Mom. We didn't want to make a big deal out of it." "I understand," I said, and I did more than he realized. I understood what it meant to be edited out of someone's happiness. We talked for 2 hours, mostly about weather and work, and Lydia's plans to open a new branch of her family's company. She smiled often, her politeness wrapping every silence like lace over a bruise. When they left, Ethan kissed my cheek, quick and cool. "We'll visit again soon," he promised. After the door closed, the house went still, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rattle of the seashell against the table. That night, I pulled my old notebook from the drawer. Its pages still smelled faintly of ink and time, under a date I didn't want to remember. I wrote 3 words that steadied my hands again. "Plan for independence," by Monday morning. I had already packed the souvenirs into a small box and set it in the hallway closet, out of sight. The house felt cleaner without them, quieter in a way that wasn't sad anymore. I brewed strong coffee and opened my old notebook again. On 1 page, I wrote a simple heading, "Assets." Beneath it, I listed everything I owned: the house on Whitaker Street, my modest savings account, the small pension from the cleaning company, the quilt stand in the back room. Nothing extraordinary, but every line was built from years of work and scraped together faith. The next day, I went to the bank on Broughton Street. The teller still remembered me. "Mrs. Willis," she said with a warm smile, "still keeping everything in order." "Trying to," I replied. My voice sounded different, firmer, almost peaceful. Later that week, I met Mr. Crawford, a quiet man with silver-rimmed glasses whose office smelled faintly of cedar. He listened as I explained what I wanted to do, nodding without judgment. "I need to update my will," I told him. "Half to charity, something for single mothers, maybe a housing fund. The other half goes to my son. But with a condition." He looked up. "What kind of condition?" "Mrs. Willis." "That he writes a letter," I said. "Not an apology, just an explanation. Something honest about why he made the choices he did." Mr. Crawford paused, then wrote it down carefully. "You're not trying to punish him," he said quietly. "No," I answered. "I'm trying to make sense of it." When the papers were ready, he slid them across the desk for my signature. I held the pen a moment before writing my name, feeling the faint tremor of finality. Outside, the Savannah air was heavy with magnolia scent. I walked slowly toward the square, passing mothers with strollers, people carrying their groceries, couples laughing. Life moved on, as it always had. For the first time in a long while, I felt I was moving with it, not as someone's mother, not as someone forgotten, but as a woman quietly reclaiming her name, one signature at a time. It began with a phone call to Mrs. Pennington, the same realtor who had sold the house next door years ago. She still remembered me, though her tone softened when I explained what I wanted. "You're selling. Marion." "That's a big step." "I know," I said, "but it's the right one." She didn't press. We arranged everything quietly. No public listings, no signs on the lawn. Just a few discreet viewings and a promise of confidentiality. The house had been mine legally for years, though Ethan never knew that. It was a precaution I'd made back when he was too young to understand how the world could turn cruel. Just in case. I'd told myself then. Now that case had arrived. For days, I packed slowly. Each room held a version of him plastic dinosaurs. School photos, medals from spelling bees, the dent in the kitchen table where he'd carved his initials. I labeled the boxes with calm precision, "Ethan's room," for storage. The sound of tape sealing cardboard was steady, rhythmic, almost like prayer. Mrs. Pennington came by one afternoon with the papers, a young couple from Charleston. She said, smiling, "They loved the garden. They're offering full price." I nodded. My signature looked oddly confident, not like the shaky cursive I'd used at the bank. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. When the final inspection came, I walked through each room one last time. The living room echoed now. The rug was gone, and my footsteps sounded foreign. I stood by the window where I used to wave goodbye to Ethan on school mornings, his little backpack bouncing as he ran down the street. Sunlight poured through the glass, catching the dust in slow motion. The air felt lighter, almost forgiving. In the kitchen, I traced my hand over the counter where we once baked his first birthday cake, blue frosting, crooked letters, laughter spilling louder than the radio. I could almost hear it again, faint and distant, fading into the hum of the empty house. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't look back. The keys felt weightless in my hand. He found me 3 days after the sale closed. I heard the pounding before I saw him, 3 sharp knocks that rattled the frame of my new apartment door. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, breathless, his eyes wild with disbelief. "You sold the house," he said, as if accusing me of a crime, without telling me that was my home. "It was never yours." "Ethan," I said softly. Not legally. Not anymore. His face flushed. You knew I wanted to raise my family there someday. How could you? I motioned for him to come in. He didn't move. The silence between us was the kind that only years of love could make unbearable. I didn't sell it to hurt you, I said finally. I sold it to remind myself I still exist. That stopped him. The air in the hallway felt thinner, the world smaller. He pressed a hand against his forehead like he was trying to erase the image. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. You don't understand. Lydia's family, they said things. They thought, he hesitated. Shame cutting through his words. They thought you wouldn't fit in, that you'd make them uncomfortable. Lydia said it was better if we kept things simple. Simple, I repeated. The word tasting like dust. He looked down, his anger collapsing into something quieter. I didn't want to hurt you. I just didn't want them to see where I came from. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the muffled noise of traffic below the window. I reached for his hand, the same hand I used to hold when crossing the street. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold back either. You can't erase where you came from, Ethan, I said quietly, and you can't erase me. His eyes filled, but the apology stayed trapped somewhere behind them. I let the silence stretch long enough for him to feel it, long enough for me to finally stop needing to fill it. By the time spring returned to Savannah, the river had changed colors again, soft gold in the morning, deep blue by dusk. I'd learned its rhythm by heart, like a song that didn't need words. My new apartment overlooked the water. The light reached every corner, gentle and unassuming. The rooms were smaller, but they felt honest. I filled them with things that grew: ferns on the windowsill, violets on the kitchen counter, basil thriving in a chipped pot. The sound of the radio replaced the silence that used to press against my chest. Sometimes, on Saturdays, I sang along to old blues records and forgot to feel lonely. 3 mornings a week. I volunteered at the women's shelter on Oglethorpe Avenue. I taught the newcomers how to budget small incomes, how to open savings accounts, how to keep receipts for proof of strength lessons no one had ever taught me. When I saw the women leave with straighter backs, I recognized a piece of myself in every one of them. One afternoon, a letter arrived Ethan's handwriting, unmistakable. My hands trembled before I even touched it. Inside, his words were careful, uneven. He wrote about shame, about choices made out of fear, about the things he'd tried to protect that never needed protecting. He said he was sorry for the silence, for letting love turn into distance. I read it once, then again, slower, letting each word settle where anger used to live. When I finished, I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into my notebook, the same one that once held my plan for independence. I didn't cry. I didn't write back. Instead, I looked out toward the river, the light glimmering against the water, steady and endless. Some doors, I whispered to no one in particular, are closed to keep peace inside. And for the first time in my life, that peace felt entirely mine.